Hello, so it's just on the stroke of noon, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Leadership Perspectives event. I think I've met many of you already, but if you haven't met me, my name is Mark Taylor, and I'm privileged to say I'm the Dean of WashU Olin Business School. As a top business school, we believe it's vitally important to contribute meaningful thoughts to, I guess, the marketplace of ideas. And this series brings you exactly that, with innovation, inspiration, informative, timely speakers and events. And we can't get any better than the speaker we have today. We're excited to welcome you to today's Leadership Perspectives, where our featured guests, Olin alumna Laurie Lee and Professor Sam Chun, will take a deep dive into the subject of leadership on a global scale. And in just a moment, we'll begin our program. But first, I'd just like to share with you the format of the event. So we'll start with Laurie and Sam's discussion on today's topic, after which they'll transition to a question and answer session. And if you'd like to submit a question, please do so. And you can do that using the Q&A feature on your screen. And we will endeavor to get to as many questions as we can during the session. So immediately following the conclusion of Laurie and Sam's conversation, we invite you to stay tuned for our leadership session with WashU Olin's Bauer Leadership Professional Certified Coach, Lara Heberlein. Lara will share key elements of the Bauer Leadership's approach to becoming an effective leader and how Olin is using this model to develop values-based, data-driven leaders who are out there to change the world for good. Okay, so without further delay, it is my very great pleasure to introduce our guests. First, please help me in welcoming Laurie Lee. Laurie is a CEO of AT&T Latin America, one of 4 distinct business units operating under AT&T Incorporated. And Laurie serves as Global Marketing Officer for AT&T Inc., the parent company, and she's a global leader in communications, media, and entertainment and technology. Well, I think we've all heard of AT&T, right? A major corporation. As CEO AT&T Latin America, Laurie leads the strategy, operations, and marketing of 2 businesses in the region. And that breaks down into AT&T Mexico, which provides mobile services to more than, I think, something like 19 million consumers and businesses. And I think it's pronounced VRIO, V-R-I-O, VRIO Corporation, which provides digital entertainment services to more than 9 million subscribers throughout South America and the Caribbean. In 2020, AT&T Latin America had revenues of approaching $6 billion. As the corporation's global marketing officer, Laurie oversees corporate marketing for AT&T, including advertising, corporate communications, and events and sponsorships worldwide. And Laurie's been recognized on many executive leadership lists, including Fortune magazine's Most Powerful Women in Business and the National Diversity Council's Top 50 Most Powerful Women in Tech. And I am very, very proud to say that not only is Laurie a BSBA and an MBA Olin alumna, she's also a 2016 Olin Distinguished Alumni Award recipient. And we are very, very honored to have such a wonderful alum here with us today. So thank you, Laurie. But to leading discussion, we're joined by Sam Chun. And Sam is one of our professors of management practice here at WashU Olin, as well as our Assistant Dean and Director of Executive Education. And before joining WashU, Sam taught business administration at Harvard Business School, where he instructed MBAs, doctoral candidates, corporate executives in sales, marketing, new product development, and general management. And in previous roles, before joining the school, Sam served as a regional director at American Express, the president of Intermarkets Incorporated. This is a Pacific Rim-based supply chain management software manufacturer. And he was also, for a time, an economist and a consultant to the United States Department of Labor. So we are in distinguished company with Laurie and Sam. So without further ado, let's jump into today's discussion with Laurie and Sam. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, Laurie, how are you?
I'm good, Sam. How are you?
Great, thanks. Before we start, I would like to do a little commercial for AT&T. And this is unpaid, just to be clear to the audience.
That's a bonus, Sam. You're going to talk about AT&T and I don't have to pay you.
We switched over from cable to, I don't know all the terms, but you get the standard cable internet to fiber optics because, well, we kind of had to because everything's going on. Life-changing. It's phenomenal stuff. I think it was AT&T 1000 or something. It's brilliant stuff. So this is not a commercial. It's really just thanks. You sort of made the entire 12 months bearable. So
thank you for that. Thank you for buying our service. It sounds like you have a gigabit service with our fiber optic product, and I'm sure it's come in handy during this pandemic. So,
I don't know if it's gigabit or a megabit or a whatever, but it's more than enough, and it's a huge improvement. So we're going to talk about globality and global business, and it's obvious just from reading up on you and just getting to know you a little bit that you've got a tremendous global role. The leadoff question is, how did you get there? I mean, did you plan it that way? Did it just kind of happen? I mean, what's the story?
Yeah, Sam, I don't think I can say I planned it. In fact, I would offer that about everything I planned at the beginning of my career back when I graduated from Olin hasn't happened. Because at the time I thought I lived in Missouri, I was born in Missouri, I was never going to leave Missouri. And I took an entry-level job in a public accounting firm, and I thought that's what I would be doing for the rest of my life, living in Missouri, hopefully, being successful in public accounting. And 32 years later, I find myself in Texas, having moved several times, not in public accounting, and have the great fortune of working at AT&T. And in my most recent position, get this chance to be involved in our global business. So no, I didn't plan it, but I will say I am delighted to have had the opportunity. And it's surprised me in a few ways. I've learned a lot, but it's great to always have a new opportunity later in your career. And I have found that my exposure to our global side of our business has done that. It's interesting because my experience would tell me that in many ways, it's hard not to be global in everything we do. You're a consumer. I was just looking last night to try, my husband and I were wanting a new patio heater. It's chilly here in Dallas in the winter.
Those are great, by the way.
Yes, they are. But we were trying to find one, and we could source a patio heater from a number of different places around the globe. So as a consumer, you play in the global economy. And as a citizen, everything that happens around the globe is interconnected in some way or another. And if you pay attention to that, you certainly can learn from it. If you're an entrepreneur, technology allows you to have access to global consumers anywhere. And I think as a business person, you want to participate in the global economy because it is interconnected and there are great opportunities there. So while I never expected to have a global career, I think many of us can redefine in a lot of ways, whatever we're doing, it has global in its nature. So I consider myself lucky to have this opportunity at this point.
What did you find most surprising about it? I mean, there's got to be. I've had an international kind of a fling with a startup, but I've never really had what you can call a global career. But what did you find surprising or different about it?
Well, when I took the job, I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese. And I was concerned about that. And that concern did not disappoint. I mean, we've managed just fine. But I will say that I talked to my children who are 27 and 17 about the importance of knowing multiple languages. They fortunately are pursuing that in their education. So the language thing I anticipated, and it's something I certainly wish I had a better background in. The other thing that I think I anticipated, but maybe it still surprised me, is the amount of diversity in doing business in multiple countries. And so I expected that, but I think just the depth, the pace, the amount of change as you're trying to run a business, and maybe even with a common product, the fact that you're doing it, in our case, in 11 different countries, regulation is different, culture is different, decision-making is different. And again, I knew that was going to be the case, but I was surprised at even the degree to which those changes are absolutely relevant. And then the last thing I would just say is, being a female leader and someone who the whole topic of diversity is extremely important to me, I was actually pleasantly surprised about the ability to have diversity in leadership positions. And I'll just use AT&T as an example. We run a $6 billion business with 3 women in Latin America, and I'm really proud of that. And I maybe didn't anticipate that that breadth of acceptance when I first took the job.
That's fascinating. And the term diversity is going to have a couple of plays in this particular discussion.
Correct.
Moving on.
Correct.
I'm forecasting. We shouldn't jump ahead too much. But Latin America, would love to hear something about that. I mean, you mentioned culture already, but I've only been to Brazil once, but the pace and the feel is very different, the youthfulness and all that stuff. So it's got to be interesting. Just kind of, tell us about Latin America and what your experience has been so far.
Yeah, people ask me, both inside the company and outside the company, about so what's your job with Latin America AT&T? Because AT&T is predominantly a domestic US based business. And so a lot of people don't understand it. And I will often say we are one team that provides 2 products in 3 languages across 11 countries. And we have just over 27,000 employees serving over 30 million customers. So that's what Latin America at AT&T is. I can't emphasize enough about doing that. May sound like, okay, you have 2 product lines, you have 2 businesses, and you scale those businesses across countries. It's just not that straightforward, because what we find, and I'm sure that many of the people on this call who are involved with global businesses find the same thing, you have to really go to market very specifically, knowing the country in which you're about to enter or that you're trying to serve. And, that's just completely different. Whether you're thinking about what are the economic trends, it's going to vary completely by country. You're going to see inflation, hyperinflation in one, currency devaluation there that might be completely different in another country. The cultural aspects, how you need to go to market, how you need to message, frankly, how you make decisions inside your own employee base. And so, I think having the right approach to our team and having a good sensing mechanism about how to respond to those differences, even though we have kind of 2 basic businesses, is just really, really important in how we approach it, and how we try to be successful there.
So I think of AT&T, and there are a couple. There's some interesting threads to explore. The first thread is kind of scalability, and from just what I know about Brazil in particular, and versus an Argentina or a Chile, it's just they're all very different. And as you say, going to market requires you to be very local in the way you execute things. So how do you scale? I mean, that's got to be tough, especially when you're. I think of AT&T as phone service. I mean, I have your internet, but and I don't really think about digital entertainment or theater as really a component of it is your portfolio, but I don't think of it that way.
Right.
And so between those 2 things, it's got to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I'll just, in our business in Latin America, we have a TV business and we have a mobile phone business. And so our mobile business is in Mexico. That's a little bit more straightforward because we just operate in one country. But our television business, which is satellite based as a technology, it operates across 10 countries. And so you mentioned, Sam, Brazil versus like Chile. Okay, completely separate. And we'll just completely separate and different. We'll just start with language. Everything we do in Brazil is in Portuguese. Everything we do in Chile and other countries is in Spanish. So you just kind of can start with language. Culturally, very different countries. Perspectives in terms of regulation, where the country is economically, affects everything, you know, that you do from a go-to-market perspective. So how you market, how you interact with government officials, how you price your products, how you bundle them, etc. It's just completely different. So how we scale is we try to look for those areas where there are commonality. So for us, one of them is technology. I mean, we are satellite based. So whatever that country, no matter which one it is, it shares common technology, common satellite use, systems work outside of language can be common, but that's the more back end side, but the more front end side that's leaning into the customer, that's where I find you have to be much more differentiated.
So you've got a huge portfolio of responsibilities. So I'm just reading the list. So you've got the wireless in Mexico. You've got digital entertainment, and you're on top of that AT&T's global marketing officer. So I guess if you can shift gears, there's the business aspect. Sorry about that.
No problem, as long as it's an AT&T phone, Sam.
It's AT&T.
All right, good enough.
We were forgiven the interruption. So from a leadership perspective, when you have such a diverse array of things that are under your responsibility, you know, across the geographies and the business units, just some thoughts on that, please.
Well, I think one of the things I try to be very conscious of, given the breadth, and look, a lot of people on this call have big jobs and lots of responsibility. I think the first thing that I try to think about is, where do I spend my time? Time is such a precious resource. And when you have multiple demands, knowing and being very conscious about where you spend your time. And I think that needs to align with what are the critical strategic objectives that you want to accomplish for your organization. So it starts with that. The second thing I then think about in this is having the right team. You know, I love to work with folks, and I find folks are extremely capable and rise to the challenge. And so having the right team around you and the right skill set for whatever some of the obstacles are that you're tackling, making sure that you have the right people lined up to that. So I spend time on team. And then third, we kind of set those imperatives and then let people go get them, get out of their way, help them knock down barriers when they come up. But I'm a person who tries to think along those lines, because if you do that, I find that, you know, the breadth of what you're doing can kind of come a little bit more into focus. And, you know, using your team, listening a lot, helping them solve problems, that helps you tackle a lot of it. Just spreads you, I think, across multiple things and helps you be effective. You can't do it alone. None of this is not a one-person sport. Business is not.
Sure.
So that's how I try to think about the vastness of it. And I actually find it exhilarating, because any given day, and I'm for anybody on this call, this year has absolutely provided a different challenge every day, given the pandemic and what we've all dealt with. But in my own portfolio, in say a more normal year, I love the ability to be dealing with an issue in Mexico in the morning, but doing something with global marketing and advertising in the afternoon. I love that kind of diversity in terms of different topics to work on and different problems to solve, and interacting with my team in doing that.
So with respect to South America, I guess I'm curious, and I don't know how comfortable you've been answering this, but what do you call it as some of the bigger challenges, or the biggest challenges for the year coming forward?
Well, absolutely. First and foremost is making sure that we do all that we can to help our team and our customers and our employees continue to recover from the pandemic. So, every country is a little bit on a different curve. Latin America, from what I observe, is clearly behind the US. And so we continue to watch those trends. So first and foremost, how do we, help all of our constituents, participate in the recovery in a safe and productive way, including things like access to vaccinations and healthcare, and all of those items. And then how do we run our business to participate in that recovery, and how and when do we scale, and how and when do we add resources, and how and when do we expect the market to be back to normal. None of our markets are back to normal. Many of our markets still have very restrictive government regs in terms of travel or having open commerce. So I think, Sam, that would be absolutely at the top of my list. And then, of course, we have some strategic imperatives about growing the business and driving profitability and developing a good culture, all the more business-oriented things you would expect us to do. But right now, we are having to frame all of that within the context of how to manage that in this recovery of COVID-19. And as a subtenet to that, I think understanding how do we, country by country, engage with the appropriate government officials and help assist and be responsive, whether it's through technology or help in telemedicine or whatever it is. How do we help those officials as they try to manage this recovery on behalf of their country? How do we help be a good citizen to them, and facilitate the ease of the massive problem they're trying to solve?
Yeah, especially with the globally tense political environment we have pretty much everywhere.
Correct.
It is exceptional what's going on, and not in a good way. So.
And I think, my experience is, without commenting, positive or negative, it's just leadership in each country has definite opinions and perspectives on, how to facilitate the recovery, how to facilitate vaccinations, how to facilitate access to healthcare, and it's very different. And you just have to be very sensitive to those differences, but try to find the right outcome that serves your customers, the citizens of that country, and your customers.
So the pandemic, I'm just going to be honest. So I'm wearing the whole suit. You hear about these guys that literally wear half the suit. I decided to prevent any possibility of that by donning the entire outfit. I walked into my closet this morning and I found these things, these things called suits, and they all had dust on the shoulders because I had from things as mundane as this to, I imagine inside of your portfolio, you've got things that are soaring just because of demand, and you've got things that are taxed, like your events and theaters. There's just a broad swing and a lot of variance in who's coming out of this okay, what's not coming out of it okay, who's doing well, and all that. So, there's always this question like change. So our boss is our dean is British, and I read somewhere that the NHS has undergone decades of change in the course of a matter of weeks or months. And so one has to kind of ask these questions about what really has happened to us, what's going to be lasting, what kinds of things are transient. And, of course, you can't talk about the world because there's so much to it, but at least within AT&T's domains, what do you think? What's going to stick?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I will say at AT&T, we have parts of our total portfolio that have been impacted differently. But the core of what we do is, we would say we create connection. And so for the majority and the biggest pieces of our business, that demand for connection is higher than it's ever been. So, very quickly in the course of, I'll say, a couple of weeks, the whole world went to remote working. The world went to remote education. The world went to, yes, many of us know, right? We went to remote global economies, so fortunately for our business, that meant higher demand for the services like the one you were so kind to comment on at the beginning of this, and that is your broadband service. So that has been, very helpful in that part of our business. And I'm not shy. I'm proud of my company, and there's lots of things we do well. And one of those is rising to the occasion of a crisis, whether it's a hurricane, a terrible snowstorm, whatever it is, and including a pandemic. So we have really, rallied and tried to help all of those groups, whether it's education, schools, medicine, first responders, people working from home, have the broadband access that they need. So that part of our business has been resilient, and we're proud of the role we've played. There's other parts of our business, the media side of our company, Warner Media, that's been hit very, very hard. People are not going to theaters. So the theatrical business that Warner Brothers, has participated in just completely evaporated. And so dealing with that and dealing with how to even produce content, those have been very tough trends, and figuring out a way to come through that. It's actually driven some disruption in that business that we're participating in, with working and taking content directly to consumers via a broadband service. And we have done that. We've seen those trends with ourselves and our competitors. So it depends on the piece of our portfolio. Some have been helped and some have been hurt. And every day we're trying to work our way through that. I think what's interesting about that, Sam, is, and I think you said it, it's disrupting. And when we finish this, my personal belief is that we will all have learned a lot. And, we have probably advanced digital disruption by years, and we've all read the numbers, pick whatever number you want, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I think there's some really good things in there. I'll give you one example that's specific to my Latin American business. We had trialed with having our customer service representatives, work from home versus work from the office. And there were various pros and cons of doing that. And we had never quite, found the right answer. And in 2 weeks, we didn't have a choice. And guess what we found out? We found out and we figured out how to do it and do it very well. And our information tells us now that we have a more engaged workforce. They avoid long commutes and they're more productive. And so I think those kinds of changes that this pandemic forced are going to stick. And that's really, really good. I think there are components of our broader business economy, travel, real estate, medicine, that I think we've really pushed the limits. I think it'll come back a little bit, but I don't think business travel will ever be the same. I personally just will speak for myself. I will think really differently about when it's worth traveling globally versus traveling globally for 1 or 2 meetings, because we've proven that technology works. But in the case where I can go someplace for a week or multiple days and really experience a lot of quality time with partners, vendors, employees, customers, then I'm going to make that travel. So I think those are some of the things, and I could give you other examples in education and healthcare, where disruption has been good and we've learned some things. It will probably moderate back, but I don't know that we'll go all the way back to the old normal. I don't think that will be the case. So like any disruption, I think there's positives in it. I think there are negatives in it. And we as managers have to figure out where those push points are and manage them. And
so, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
So you talk about disruption from a business standpoint. What about from more of a qualitative leadership standpoint? Personally, I think managing this environment is a completely different kettle of fish. And trying to understand your people and motivate them it's a different kind of a challenge right now, don't you think?
It is completely. And I will say, I hope I'm not alone in this conversation in saying that most of the time I feel like we've adjusted okay, and sometimes I find myself frustrated by not being able to do more. But we've leaned into technology. I mean, I hope you would expect that of us, but I think it's true for all of us. We've figured out how to do WebEx or Zoom and use virtual meetings. And operationally, we figured out how to use technology to serve customers. We know how to walk cell phones out to the street, and we've changed all of our business processes. But to your point about leadership, I just think you have to work extra hard, and I've had to work extra hard. I'm sure everyone on this call has worked extra hard to figure out, how do you communicate? And what I find is it's hard to have the sensing mechanism for what's landing and what's not landing, or what are people confused by, because you can't have the water cooler discussion, right? You don't have that sensing mechanism. So I've found myself trying to check in with people. I talk on the phone a lot, like I dial people. I figured out how to do virtual happy hours. I mean, all the stuff that everybody on this call is doing. You just have to really overcompensate for truly checking in with your team, not so much on the business and the strategy and that, but like what's on your mind? What are you struggling with? The other topic on this conversation I would just raise is, Sam, I think it's made me more empathetic as a leader. Because to the point you raised and you and I talked about yesterday, all of us are trying to figure out how to run our business virtually, take care of our children's education virtually, keep ourselves healthy, take care of our parents. I'm like, it's just made me much more, I think, empathetic in making sure that I understand what's going on with the whole person that I'm working with, not just the professional that shows up at AT&T. And I think that's important because of the situation we're all in. And frankly, I think that makes me, a better leader. I love to see someone's pet come into the Zoom call that we've all had, or I loved getting a chance to see, someone's child who comes in and says, hey, I need help with this question on my homework. So you have to work hard at it. I don't think I'm perfect at it, but I do think there's benefits. And I think it's made me a little bit better leader.
Yeah, the appropriate moments of comedy are very nice to see when they're appropriate, of course.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing, right? We take our business seriously, but we don't take each other. I mean, we don't take ourselves too seriously.
Absolutely.
So having that, just acknowledging that and knowing that's what it is and rallying together, that's very morale building, and that goes a long way to then tackling the hard business problem that sets before us.
Yeah, and you see the other side of that as well, just the the story of younger people and suicides. It's heartbreaking what's going on out there, and it's the isolate. I mean, if AT&T's business is connecting people, we have to find better ways to connect, because this isn't going to go away right away. It's going to be with us for a while still.
I think that's exactly right, and using our technology not just in the business setting, but making sure that we can reach out to our loved ones and have different ways to connect on birthdays and special occasions. And unfortunately, a lot of services for people who have lost their lives. That's all really, really important. And I wish we didn't have that circumstance, but it's really important that we do that.
Right. So I'm assuming that a significant fraction of the audience out there are in fact some of our students and tuning in from various levels. And you've got the background of being both a BSBA alum, an MBA alum, and a distinguished alumni. And so that's a third tranche that few of us ever get to inhabit. But I guess the first thing is, one, did you find that your MBA, I mean, you had a BSBA. There's this really interesting question. You do the BSBA, and is the MBA kind of, is that icing on the cake, or is that just more cake? You know, what is that? And did it help you, and how did it help you? And I guess I'm sure some students out there are curious how to best think about their educations, especially now when things are shifting so much, and the impact is just, it's universal. I mean, no one's escaping this. So just any thoughts on that would be great.
Well, first of all, I just want to say you're too kind. You and Dean Taylor are very kind in your introductions and your comments. Look, I believe that my education at Washington University and in the Olin School was foundational to everything that I've done. You know, and by the way, quick note, I did what was at the time called the 3-2 program. So I got my undergrad and my graduate degree in 5 years. So I did it back to back.
Impressed.
It worked for me. I will say that I think there's a lot of advantage in having to take a break between the two programs, because you get a little practical business and then you can go back for the MBA. I kind of missed that, but that would be my advice to future students. But look, my education was the foundation of everything that I have been able to do. And without that education, I don't think, you know, I would be sitting here today. So what is that? And so for me, it's really about problem solving. I mean, I think that's what our education does for us. I mean, sure, you get the foundational things of financial acumen. You learn about strategy and marketing and economics and all those things that are like fundamental to being, you know, knowing the language of business per se. But you really learn to be problem solvers. And I remember doing, and I graduated in 1989, so I'm really aging myself, but I remember I had study groups and we would work on group projects. And so I think you learn to problem solve and you learn to collaborate. And those are fundamental skills that you take with you through your entire career, because then you get a job. And I'm very pragmatic about these things. What you do is you solve problems every day, hopefully using the people that you work with. And so it's just, you know, I can't emphasize enough how important and how great I feel about my education. I was the first in my family to go to college. I am very appreciative that my grandmother and my father insisted that I do that, because it truly was, instrumental in the road that I took. The last thing I would say, and it kind of ties back to your questions to me around global, is in learning about how the program has shifted recently and giving, you know, our graduate students in particular a more global experience, particularly when we get back to normal times. I think that's just really powerful and really incredible, and the absolute right approach for all the reasons we talked about earlier.
We're hoping to get back to global as soon as the global allow global. So yeah. We're hoping, not hoping, we're actually actively working towards making that happen. Okay.
Awesome.
So Laurie, you've had a tremendous career, really, and thanks so much for sharing it with us. Just giving us an insight into some of the things that you've been working on and thinking about, especially through now. So we've got some questions. I think it's a good time to transition to Q&A. Would that be okay?
Sure.
All right. So now I have to kind of reveal my age status and don reading glasses, because I have to read the text box where these things are flowing through. Okay. First question. So the quiz thus begins, right? So we're going to talk about not your company. What are your thoughts on how Netflix has enacted the now cliche "think global, act local" in quotes?
Okay. What are my thoughts on?
Let me know if you want to repeat anything, and I can.
Yeah, say it one more time. Act
so
local.
What are your thoughts on how Netflix has enacted the now cliche "think global, act local"? I think this goes back to kind of what you were saying about Latin America earlier.
Yeah, I think, so first of all, my perspective on Netflix is, they're a formidable competitor. I think that they recognized disruptive trends. They took advantage of them. And I think they did it with a very global mindset. And my observation is that they leveraged, platforms and technology and scaled, back to our conversation, very appropriately. And yet, when I look at what their service is like in the US and what their service is like in the countries in which I operate in Latin America, they're locally different because of the type of content or the diversity in content, or there'll be more, Spanish speaking or content produced in country. So I think they've done a good job of that. They've had a very global mindset. They caught the trends, but yet they know how to adapt their service, on that front end, customer touching, in a very good way, while scaling infrastructure, and scaling it on the back end.
It's really kind of interesting. We have Netflix, and it's really odd, but we get a lot of suggestions for Korean miniseries, which my wife is an avid consumer of, but I get it in my account. I'm wondering how they do that. It's actually think global, but it's really act at the unit.
Right.
Not even local,
Act at the individual inside your household, because you have separate profiles and they are very good at using, again, scaled technology and algorithms to learn about you, to target Sam different than Sam's wife. So, I think they're doing a good job of that cliche. And I think their competitors, including HBO Max, which is a product in our portfolio, are trying to do the very same thing. And it would be the other thing I will say, Sam, is when you produce a piece of content, the best thing you can do to drive the return on that piece of content is scale it. And so having a global aspect to reaching customers and distributing that, it's really smart.
Yeah, as far as I know, I'm in Missouri, so how I get Korean content is interesting and creepy in a little bit in certain ways.
In a good way, Sam. It's creepy in a good way. They're trying to bring you content that's relative and interesting to you, and you will teach them how to do it as you pick and choose on what you click on.
The recommendation engine works. Okay, next question. Let's see. Early in my career, I gotta find my glasses. Early in my career, I worked with AT&T Japan and did not speak Japanese. Translation gave me time to think, and I liked it. How do you handle not speaking the language of your customers?
So I too use translation. And it's an interesting thought. I hadn't really put it in those words. It does give you time to think. And so often we have multiple millions of retail customers. So a lot of times the feedback I get is like reading their service suggestions, and those are all translated for me. And it does allow me, allow me time to think. So from that perspective, that's helpful. When it comes to dealing with partners, vendors, government regulators, unfortunately, I speak English. Many of them, to their credit, speak English, and so we do those meetings in English. And if we need to, we use a translator, and I find that a little bit more difficult real time. Punchline for me on this is, and I wish I had done this. I made the call not to spend a couple of hours every morning trying to become fluent in Spanish. I chose not to do that. I think that might have been a mistake. But in the breadth of what I had going, we kind of decided I could use my team, and it's worked out fine. But I just encourage people. I think being bilingual and knowing multiple languages is really, really important. So it hasn't, It hasn't been a huge impediment, but it certainly would be easier, and I would feel better. I would feel better to go into meetings and be able to speak Spanish as opposed to ask people to speak English or have to work through a translator in live communication. Written communication, it absolutely is a time to reflect.
Well, I think in at least in maybe it's my imagination, but at least in Barcelona, when I order in Spanish, I feel like they give me a little more wine. So they're inbuilt advantages. But I did use simultaneous translating. So this company that that Mark had mentioned about, just the one that I ran in Korea was kind of a failed startup. So it really shouldn't be on my resume, but it actually still is. I use these simultaneous translating services, and I found a really interesting effect that the Koreans actually held it against me that I was using kind of translational services because of my skin. And my Korean is good enough that I can hold a 5-minute conversation, but not good enough that I can really go like,
Right.
a complete distance. It's a fascinating question. It's the cultural context is huge.
And it'll be different. My observation is I bet it would be very different depending on the person, depending on where you are and in what country and meeting with whom.
Okay, we have a few more questions, and I think this one is it's an interesting plumbing of our last question. Did having an MBA really pivot your career? I think I'm not sure exactly what the motivation behind the question is, but there it is. Did having an MBA really pivot your career?
Well, I don't know if I can say it really pivoted my career because, again, I graduated in 1989 with I graduated with my undergrad in 88. I graduated with my graduate degree in 89 because I did 3-2. So then I launched my career. So can I say, going back for an MBA really pivoted my career, which is, I think, it's a decision a lot of students face. I can't say that wasn't my experience. But what I can say is that having a really strong business education, and for me, it was both degrees, absolutely pivoted my career. And maybe pivot isn't the right word, but it was completely instrumental to entering the business world and be able to ramp quicker on problem solving and being a leader and understanding where to take businesses, stretch them, grow them, make hard decisions, drive returns. Without the education that I got at Olin, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I fundamentally believe that, and I love the school.
Thank you, appreciate that. But the point's well taken. I mean, it's capital, and you have to deploy it in the right way. And I loved your point about problem solving.
Look,
it doesn't matter.
I'm also a person who thinks there's no one size fits all. And I will tell a lot of people that I mentor on whatever the topic is. And in this case, maybe it's a decision to go back and get an MBA. Only you know what works for you. Only you know what your value system is and what your ambition is and what success looks like for your life. And so if you think having an MBA advances your probability of success against what your authentic goals are, then by all means, go do it. But maybe you want to be an entrepreneur, and I think an MBA can be helpful to an entrepreneur, but maybe you don't. I don't believe in one size fits all, and I coach a lot of people to acknowledge that and to acknowledge, know what's right for you, and then have the courage to stand behind it. Because I don't believe in cookie cutter approaches.
A few more. Let's see. What is your advice? By the way, I just found the easy view button in my control panel, so I can take the glasses off. What is your advice with diligence and redistributing responsibilities when sharing leadership? I guess this is kind of a delegation question.
Yeah. Well, I think my first comment would be, like, how do I want to say this? Like, let them go. Like, I see when it comes to delegation, I think some leaders kind of like pinch up a little bit because they don't believe they can delegate it, and they like let go of the control, because I have found in my career, the people who really can help you solve those problems and advance your business are the people closest to the customer or the people on your team. It's not me.
Right.
And so I think the first thing I would just say is you have to embrace delegation, and you have to like give it to them, and then be there when they're like, hey, I need some advice, or hey, I need some capital, or hey, we could do this, but I can't get through this roadblock, and then help them solve it. I fundamentally am, this is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. And if you really want to scale your career and take on more and more responsibility, you have to get really good at trusting your team, and letting them run with it. Now, there's some foundational work to that. You better have a good team. You better have thought about what are the significant strengths that you need on your team to solve the business problem of the day. But if you have that, let them go. Let them go. They will rise to the occasion.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than fake delegation.
Correct.
The
Correct.
background micromanager as opposed to the foreground micromanager.
And the other thing I think that, I try to do, I'm by no means perfect, and I try to get better every day, is I think you have to listen to your team. This is a little bit to your point of not real delegation. When they come back to talk to you and they have a different opinion than you do, or they have whatever it is, different data than you expected, or they want to push on something, you have to really listen. Listening and understanding, as opposed to broadcasting, really, really critical, I think, to be a good delegator and get to the right outcome.
Trying to convince them what they should do, as opposed to listening to what they're telling you that should be done.
Well said, Sam.
Right. Okay, let's keep on going. With the proliferation of streaming services, do you think the consumer is getting a good experience? And when will it end? This is cheating. They're adding like 3 questions into one. When will it end? And then it's a statement, not a question. We can't subscribe to all of them. So I guess here it is again. With the proliferation of streaming services, do you think the consumer is getting a good experience? And is that going to last?
So look, here's what I would say. We're in the middle of a disruption. We're in the middle of a disruption of what we, would refer to as traditional television that is, changing to be very digital oriented and one-to-one. So broadcast to one-to-one. So we're in the middle of that disruption. And right now there is going to be a lot of players that come in and try to take advantage of that disruption. So first of all, I think we're in the middle of that. Second point, do I think it's a good experience? I think some products are better than others, but if a customer wants to watch the content they choose at the time they choose, when they want, on any device, and these services allow them to do it, well, that's a good thing. They're getting to make more, they're getting more choice, they're getting to make their selections, and I think that's a good experience because it's meeting customers where they want to view content. Do I think they're perfect? No. Do I think we'll see a lot of innovation? Yes. I think it will continue. You mentioned recommendation engines. Those will only get more perfected and better. We will have very targeted profiles for each individual, maybe even at some point when it recognizes what device you're watching it on and formats it for that device. I think we're going to get a lot better. Yeah. And then I think ultimately, we will get through that disruptive trend, and then things will settle out, and there will be some of the services that really do well and continue. And I think there's some services that won't make it or get rolled into others. I think that's a pretty typical business cycle trend, and we're in the middle of it.
Yeah, the evolutionary curve. Though it feels like the 1990s, but not as good. It's like, it's a different way of happening. So we're kind of running down the clock here. So I think this is either the last or the penultimate question, depending on how the answer goes. And it's about you. So Would you please speak a little bit about your experiences working with the very different roles at AT&T during your tenure? Specifically, how did you pivot from one role to the next, and what factors drove those decisions?
It's a very good question. So I have been at AT&T. So I've worked for 32 years. This is the fourth company that I've worked in. I've been at AT&T for 22.
You're giving too many numbers out. We can do the math.
Well, that's okay. I'm not young anymore, but I'm not old either, so I'm good with it. And here's what I would say. What I have loved about AT&T is I got the opportunity to do a lot of different jobs, regardless of what my expertise was coming out of college. And so back to this whole, how has my education shaped my career? I was a finance accounting emphasis. Okay. But I got to AT&T, and yes, that was leveraged, but I got the opportunity to do work in strategy. I got the opportunity to do work in finance. I got the opportunity to do work in operations, customer service, marketing, and now I'm running a business. And so we just have a culture of where we let people who we believe, I don't mean this self-serving in any way, but if we think people have talent, we throw them into different jobs. And some companies do that. Some companies are more, you kind of work up through your function. We kind of have a perspective of, we look for great, talented people who can be general managers. And so, again, I don't want to sound like I was just haphazard about my career, because I wasn't, but I am fortunate to work for a company like AT&T that allowed me to raise my hand and say, I want to go do operations. Okay, we'll let you go do operations. And so that's been very developmental for me. And I've had the chance to do, which this is a point I feel really strongly about, particularly if there's anyone on this call who's trying to figure out what their next steps should be in their career. I've done hardcore line jobs, meaning operations jobs, and I've done staff jobs. And right now I have a foot in both, and I love it. But I fundamentally believe you have to do both, and you're a better leader as a result of that. So the diversity of my experience has been incredibly valuable to me. I appreciated working in a culture and for a company that allowed me to do that and didn't silo me. And I guess, Sam, I would also just say that's a real punctuation point for the value that my education gave me, because whether it was my undergrad, but maybe more importantly, my graduate degree, it gives you enough of that foundation that you can tap in and start solving those problems that you run into in whatever job that you had.
Yeah, and I think that point is well heard. Business is not like science and engineering. It's not about specialists. It's really about generalists, very much.
Well, and maybe a place to end this conversation is, and I tell the people I work with this all the time, and it's kind of the punctuation is, you have to have the right foundational skills, but at the end of the day, people follow people. People don't follow any functional skill set. People don't follow any particular business objective. Not really. People follow people. And so throughout whatever opportunity you're given, be the best leader you can be. And I think the rest takes care of itself.
And I think that is a perfect note to end on, because we've outstayed our welcome. I feel the cane coming out from the background to yank me off stage. Laurie, thank you so much. It was an honor and a privilege to speak with you and get to know you a little bit, and a little bit, obviously. So thank you. And we're going to continue with the day. So have a great day, Laurie.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
Okay. Also, big thanks to the audience out there. Really appreciate you being here. So I got to read a couple of things out. So as we close, we've got some slides going. And if you want to interact with Olin in any way, you can take note of these slides, screenshot them, write them down, and you can reach Ruthie Piles and GPO. I got to not use the acronym, the Graduate Programs Office. We've got Jen Witten and Dorothy Kittner at the Weston Career Center, Sean Martin, Alumni Development, and Michelle Ralston, and me for Executive Education. If you have any interest in those, please reach out. And we're going to take a 3-minute break. And we'll be joined by Lara Herbeline, who's going to tell us about how the Boureau Leadership Center engages in values-based, data-driven in a way to make the right kind of leader. So thanks all. And